For your safety, he said, pushing me out. I answered with 2 suitcases in ironclad conditions. Earn it or lose it. Guess which path he chose.
My son looked me straight in the eye and said the words that would change everything between us forever. Dad, you can have your inheritance, but only if you move out of this house and never come back. I smiled, walked to my bedroom, and started packing. But here's the thing he didn't expect. I packed twice. And by the time I was done, my son learned a lesson about greed that cost him everything he thought he deserved. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening in the comments. The morning started like any other Tuesday in my 68 years of life. I was sitting at the kitchen table, the same oak table my late wife Margaret and I had bought 37 years ago when we first moved into this house. The coffee was still hot, steam curling up from my favorite mug, the one with the faded "World's Best Dad" that my son David had given me for Father's Day when he was 12. Back then, he meant it. I was reading the newspaper when I heard his car pull into the driveway. David had been coming by more frequently lately, always with that same expression on his face. Not the look of a son visiting his aging father out of love or concern. No, this was the look of a man calculating assets, measuring time, waiting for his payday. The front door opened without a knock. He'd stopped knocking months ago, treating my home like it was already his. His footsteps echoed across the hardwood floors I'd installed myself 20 years ago, when my back was stronger and my hands steadier. "Morning, Dad." His voice carried that fake cheerfulness that had replaced genuine warmth somewhere along the way. He was wearing one of his expensive suits, the kind that cost more than I used to make in a month back when I was working construction. Everything about David screamed success. The designer watch, the polished shoes, the perfectly styled hair. But success, I'd learned, and character were 2 entirely different things. David. I set down my newspaper and studied my son's face. 42 years old, and I could still see traces of the boy who used to help me build birdhouses in the garage. But that boy had disappeared long ago, replaced by this stranger who saw dollar signs when he looked at me. He pulled out the chair across from me and sat down heavily, like a man preparing for battle. That's when I knew. Whatever he'd come to say, it wasn't going to be pleasant. "We need to talk about your situation here, Dad." My situation, as if living in the house I'd owned for nearly 4 decades was somehow a problem that needed solving. "What situation is that?" David leaned back in his chair, the way he did during his business meetings when he was about to deliver bad news to a client. I'd seen him do it before, during family gatherings where he'd practice his corporate persona on us like we were test subjects. "You're getting older. This house is getting harder for you to maintain. And frankly, it's not safe for someone your age to be living alone in a place this size." I almost laughed. Not safe. The house was in better condition now than when I'd first bought it. Every creaking board had been replaced, every leaky pipe fixed, every electrical outlet updated to code. I'd spent the last 5 years making improvements specifically because I planned to live here until the day I died. "The house is fine, David, and so am I." "Dad, be realistic. You're almost 70. What happens if you fall down those stairs? What if you have a medical emergency and no one's around to help?" These weren't the words of a concerned son. These were the arguments of a man who'd already made up his mind and was just going through the motions of appearing reasonable. "I have neighbors, I have friends, I have a medical alert system." David waved his hand dismissively, like my actual safety was irrelevant to whatever point he was really trying to make. "That's not enough. You need to be somewhere with professional care, somewhere designed for people in your situation." There was that word again, situation, like being old was a crime I'd committed. "What are you really saying, David?" He straightened up, and I saw something shift in his expression. The fake concern disappeared, replaced by something colder, more honest. "I'm saying you need to consider moving to a senior living community, somewhere appropriate for your age and needs." "And what happens to this house?" "Well, obviously, it would need to be sold to pay for your care." Obviously. Like it was the most natural thing in the world for a son to sell his father's home out from under him. I set my coffee mug down carefully, the ceramic making a soft click against the wooden table. In that moment, I realized I was looking at a stranger. This wasn't the boy I'd raised, the one I'd taught to ride a bike and helped with homework and cheered for at Little League games. This was someone else entirely. "I see, and I suppose you've already looked into these senior communities?" David's face brightened, mistaking my calm tone for acceptance. "Actually, yes. There's a wonderful place called Sunset Manor about 20 minutes from here. Very clean, very professional. They have activities, meal plans, medical staff on site 24/7. How much? Well, that's the thing. It's not cheap. About $4,000 a month plus additional fees for medical care and activities. But Dad, you can afford it. This house is worth at least $300,000, maybe more in today's market. That money could keep you comfortable for years. Comfortable, living in a room the size of my current walk-in closet, eating cafeteria food, following someone else's schedule, surrounded by strangers waiting to die. That was his definition of comfortable. And what about you, David? What do you get out of this arrangement? For the first time in our conversation, he looked uncomfortable. I don't know what you mean. Sure you do. You've been thinking about this house for months, haven't you? Wondering when you'll inherit it, planning what you'll do with the money. Dad, that's not what this is about. Isn't it? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you've decided I'm too much trouble to deal with, and you'd rather cash out now than wait for me to die naturally. David's face flushed red, but not with shame, with anger. That's completely unfair. I'm trying to look out for your best interests. My best interests or yours? We stared at each other across the table, 30 years of growing distance crystallizing into this single moment. I could see the calculation in his eyes, the way he was weighing his words, deciding how much truth he could afford to tell. Fine. His voice turned cold, businesslike. You want to know the truth? Here it is. I can't keep worrying about you every day, wondering if you're okay, dealing with your problems. I have my own life, my own family, my own responsibilities. And yes, eventually this house will be mine anyway. So why not make the transition now while we can both benefit from it? There it was, the honesty I'd been waiting for. No more pretense about my safety or my best interests, just raw greed and convenience, wrapped up in the language of practicality. I appreciate your honesty, son. Something in my tone made him nervous. Maybe it was too calm, too accepting. He'd expected me to fight, to argue, to beg him to reconsider. Instead, I was smiling. So you'll consider it? Oh, I'll do more than consider it. I stood up slowly, my joints protesting after sitting too long in one position. Age, I discovered, was a series of small betrayals by your own body, but my mind was sharper than it had been in years. I'm going to pack. David's face lit up with surprise and relief. Really, Dad, I think you're making the right choice. I know it's hard, but I said I'm going to pack. I didn't say I was going to Sunset Manor. The smile died on his face. What do you mean? I mean, David, that you've just taught me something very valuable about the kind of man you've become. And I've decided I don't want to spend my remaining years being a burden to someone who sees me as nothing more than an inconvenience and a source of future income. Dad, you're not a burden. Aren't I? You just spent 20 minutes explaining why taking care of me is too difficult for you to handle. Why my continued existence in my own home is such a problem that you need to solve it by shipping me off somewhere else. I walked toward the stairs, feeling lighter than I had in months. For the first time in years, I knew exactly what I needed to do. Where are you going? I told you, I'm going to pack. David followed me to the bottom of the stairs, his voice taking on a desperate edge. Pack for what? Where are you going to go? I paused on the third step and looked back at him. My son, the boy I'd loved more than my own life, who'd grown into a man I barely recognized. That's not your concern anymore, is it? You've made it very clear that my problems are mine to solve. Dad, don't be ridiculous. You can't just leave. You have nowhere to go. Don't I? I continued up the stairs, each step feeling like a small victory. Behind me, I could hear David pacing in the hallway, muttering to himself, probably trying to figure out how this conversation had gone so wrong so fast. In my bedroom, I opened the closet and pulled out my old leather suitcase, the one Margaret and I had used for our honeymoon trip to Niagara Falls 45 years ago. It still smelled faintly of her perfume, a ghost of happier times. I started with the essentials: clothes, medications, important documents, the photo albums Margaret had so carefully organized. Each item I placed in the suitcase felt like a small act of rebellion against the future my son had planned for me. David appeared in the doorway, his face a mixture of confusion and growing panic. Dad, what are you doing? This is crazy. Is it? You said I needed to move out. I'm moving out. But not like this, not without a plan. Oh, I have a plan, David, a very good plan. I continued packing, methodically folding shirts and pants, rolling socks the way my father had taught me during his army days. Every movement was deliberate, purposeful. What plan? Where are you going to live? I smiled and reached for my second suitcase. That's when I started packing the second suitcase, and that's when David's whole world began to unravel. I pulled my second suitcase from the back of the closet, this one newer, black with silver trim. Margaret had bought it for a cruise we never got to take before the cancer came. I set it on the bed next to the first one and began filling it with things David didn't expect me to pack. 2 suitcases? Dad, you're really starting to scare me. The first item I placed in the second suitcase was my address book. The worn leather cover had phone numbers and addresses collected over 7 decades of life. David watched me pack it with growing confusion. Why do you need that old thing? Everyone's information is online now. Not everyone, son. Next went my financial documents. Bank statements, investment records, insurance policies, the deed to the house. I folded each paper carefully and placed them in a manila envelope that went straight into the suitcase. David's eyes widened as he recognized what I was packing. Dad, you don't need to take all that stuff with you. I can handle your finances while you're getting settled. Can you? I moved to my desk and opened the bottom drawer. Inside was a small metal box I hadn't touched in months. The key was taped underneath the drawer, exactly where I'd hidden it 15 years ago. David had never known about this box, never thought to look for it. Inside were documents he'd never seen, copies of legal papers I'd had prepared after Margaret died, when I realized that planning for the future meant more than just writing a simple will. What's in there? Insurance policies, investment accounts, things you don't need to worry about. But that wasn't entirely true. What David didn't know was that over the past 2 years, since he'd started making comments about my age and this house being too much for me, I'd been making some changes. Quiet changes. The kind that don't show up in casual conversation, but would matter a great deal when the time came. I packed my laptop next, the one David always made fun of because it was 7 years old and ran slowly. He didn't know that I'd spent countless hours on that laptop, researching, planning, making decisions about my future that had nothing to do with Sunset Manor. Dad, please talk to me. What's really going on here? I looked at my son, really looked at him. When had he become this person? When had the boy who used to climb into bed with Margaret and me during thunderstorms turned into a man who saw his father as a problem to be solved? Do you remember when you were 8 and you broke Mrs. Henderson's window with a baseball? David frowned, caught off guard by the sudden change in topic. What does that have to do with anything? Do you remember what I told you then? Dad, I really don't see. I told you that when you make a mistake, you have 2 choices. You can try to hide from the consequences, or you can face them head on and learn from them. Do you remember what you chose to do? David shifted uncomfortably in the doorway. I went and apologized to Mrs. Henderson and paid for the window with my allowance money. That's right, and do you remember what I told you I was proud of? You said you were proud that I took responsibility instead of making excuses. Exactly. I closed the second suitcase and zipped it shut. I wonder what happened to that boy. Dad, I am taking responsibility. That's what this whole conversation is about. I'm trying to make sure you're taken care of. No, David, you're trying to make sure you don't have to take care of me. There's a difference. I lifted both suitcases off the bed. They were heavier than I'd expected, but I managed. At 68, I was still stronger than my son gave me credit for. Where are you going? To face the consequences of raising a son who thinks his inheritance is more important than his father. David followed me downstairs, his voice getting higher with each step. That's not fair. That's not what this is about. Isn't it? Tell me, David, what were you planning to do with this house once I was safely tucked away at Sunset Manor? He didn't answer immediately, which was answer enough. I hadn't really thought about it. Liar. The word hung between us like a slap. David's face went white. How can you say that to me? Because it's true. You've thought about it plenty. You've probably already talked to real estate agents, haven't you? Maybe even gotten an appraisal? The way his eyes darted away told me I was right. It's not like that, Dad. Then what is it like? Explain it to me. Help me understand how selling your father's house while he's still alive is somehow an act of love. I set the suitcases down by the front door and turned to face him. This was the moment I'd been building toward, the reason I'd packed so carefully. You want to know where I'm going? I'm going to see a lawyer. David's face went from white to gray. A lawyer? Why do you need a lawyer? Because, son, you've just made it very clear that you're more interested in my money than my well-being. And that changes things. It changes everything. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the number I was looking for. Richard Morrison, estate attorney. I'd found him online 3 months ago, right around the time David's visits became more frequent, and his questions about my plans became more pointed. What are you doing? I'm calling Mr. Morrison to schedule an appointment. It seems I need to make some revisions to my will. David's face went through several shades of panic as I dialed the number. Dad, wait, please, can we just talk about this? Talk about what? About how you've decided I'm too old and inconvenient to live in my own house? About how you've calculated that it would be more profitable for you if I were warehoused somewhere while you liquidate my assets? Morrison and Associates, this is Janet. Janet, this is Robert Williams. I spoke with Mr. Morrison a few months ago about updating my estate planning. I'd like to schedule an appointment for this afternoon if possible. David was frantically waving his hands, mouthing, "No, no, no," like a man watching his future disappear in real time. Let me check his schedule, Mr. Williams. Yes, he has an opening at 3 o'clock today. Would that work for you? Perfect. I'll see him then. I hung up the phone and picked up my suitcases again. Dad, please don't do anything rash. Let's sit down and discuss this like adults. Adults? You mean the way you discussed this with me? By presenting it as a fait accompli and expecting me to be grateful for your generosity in allowing me to sell my house to pay for my own exile? I opened the front door. The morning air was crisp, clean, full of possibility. You know what the really sad part is, David? If you had come to me with genuine concern, if you had offered to help me age in place, if you had suggested modifications to make the house safer, or hired someone to help with maintenance, I would have listened. I might even have agreed. David's voice cracked slightly. We can still do that. We can figure something out. No, we can't, because now I know what you really think of me, and more importantly, I know what I really think of you. I stepped onto the porch, the same porch where I'd taught David to ride his first bicycle, where we'd carved jack-o'-lanterns every Halloween, where Margaret and I had sat holding hands and planning our future. Dad, if you walk out that door, if you go to that lawyer, you're going to regret it. I turned back to look at him one last time. The only thing I regret, son, is not seeing who you really are sooner. What's that supposed to mean? It means that when you came here this morning, you thought you were talking to a helpless old man who would gratefully accept whatever scraps of dignity you were willing to leave him. But you were wrong. I started walking toward my car, the suitcases bumping against my legs with each step. Dad, where are you going to stay? You can't just drive around with 2 suitcases. I loaded the suitcases into my trunk and got behind the wheel. Through the windshield, I could see David standing on the porch, looking lost and confused and younger than his 42 years. I rolled down the window. Don't worry about where I'm staying, David. Worry about where you're going to be living when this is all over. I started the engine and backed out of the driveway, watching in my rearview mirror as my son stood there trying to process what had just happened. He'd come here expecting to manipulate a weak old man into giving up everything he'd worked for. Instead, he'd awakened something he wasn't prepared to deal with. The drive to Richard Morrison's office took 23 minutes through familiar streets lined with memories I was about to protect in ways David couldn't imagine. At every red light, I thought about the conversation we just had, about the moment my son revealed who he really was underneath all that false concern. But mostly, I thought about what came next, because David was right about one thing. This was going to change everything, just not in the way he expected. The law offices of Morrison and Associates sat in a converted Victorian house on Elm Street, the kind of building that whispered old money and established power. I'd driven past it 100 times over the years, never imagining I'd need their services. But life has a way of teaching you that the things you never thought you'd need become the things you can't live without. Richard Morrison was exactly what you'd expect from an estate attorney. Silver hair, expensive suit, handshake firm enough to crush walnuts. But his eyes were kind, and when he looked at me across his mahogany desk, I didn't see dollar signs. I saw genuine concern. Mr. Williams, you mentioned on the phone that you need to make some revisions to your will. What kind of changes are we talking about? I set my briefcase on the chair beside me and pulled out the documents I'd brought. Bank statements, property deeds, investment portfolios. The paper trail of a lifetime spent building something that was supposed to matter. I need to disinherit my son. Morrison's pen stopped moving across his legal pad. In 27 years of practice, he'd probably heard everything. But something about the way I said those words made him look up sharply. That's a serious decision, Mr. Williams. May I ask what's prompted this? So I told him everything. David's visit that morning, the conversation about Sunset Manor, the way my own son had looked at me like I was inventory to be liquidated. Morrison listened without interruption, occasionally making notes, his expression growing more troubled with each detail. I see. And you're certain this wasn't just a misunderstanding? Sometimes family members express concern in ways that come across as, Mr. Morrison, my son calculated the value of my house down to the dollar. He researched senior living facilities without asking my opinion. He presented his plan as a done deal and expected me to be grateful for the opportunity to pay for my own imprisonment. Morrison set down his pen and leaned back in his leather chair. In 40 years of estate law, I've seen families destroyed by money, but I've also seen families saved by the right legal structure. Before we discuss disinheritance, let me ask you something. What do you really want to accomplish here? The question caught me off guard. I'd been so focused on punishing David that I hadn't thought about what came after. I want him to understand that his father isn't a commodity to be managed. And then what? I want him to realize that respect isn't something you inherit, it's something you earn. Morrison nodded slowly, like a man who'd found the key to a complicated lock. Mr. Williams, disinheriting your son is certainly your right. But let me suggest something that might be more effective. Instead of taking everything away, what if we gave you the power to give it back on your terms? For the next 2 hours, we crafted something beautiful. Not a simple will, but a trust structure that would teach David lessons he'd never forget. Morrison called it incentive-based inheritance, but I preferred to think of it as delayed justice. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. David would inherit nothing automatically. Instead, he'd have to earn his inheritance through a series of conditions that would prove he understood what family really meant. Each condition came with a timeline, a clear objective, and a substantial reward for completion. The beauty of this structure, Morrison explained as his secretary typed up the documents, is that it gives your son multiple opportunities to demonstrate the character you want to see. If he fails, the money goes elsewhere. If he succeeds, he gets everything you intended to leave him, plus the knowledge that he earned it. And if he decides the conditions are too difficult, then he's proven your point about his character, and you'll have protected your assets from someone who doesn't deserve them. By 5 o'clock, we'd created a legal framework that would either redeem my son or expose him completely. The documents were signed, witnessed, and filed. David's future was now entirely in his own hands. I drove home as the sun was setting, painting the familiar streets in shades of gold and amber. My house looked different somehow, like I was seeing it through new eyes. This wasn't just the place where I'd raised my family anymore. It was ground zero in a battle for David's soul. His car was still in my driveway. I found him in the kitchen, sitting at the same table where we'd had our morning confrontation. But something had changed in his posture. The arrogant confidence was gone, replaced by something that might have been fear. Dad, thank God you're back. I was starting to think you'd done something. Something what, David? I don't know. Something permanent. I set my briefcase on the counter and looked at my son. Really looked at him. The expensive suit was wrinkled now, his perfect hair mussed from running his hands through it. He looked like a man who'd spent the day staring into an abyss. I did do something permanent. I saw a lawyer. David's face went white again, that same shade of panic I'd seen that morning. Dad, please tell me you didn't do anything crazy. Crazy? You mean like planning to sell my house without my permission? Like researching senior living facilities behind my back? Like treating your father like a burden you needed to dispose of? That's not what I was doing. Then what were you doing? David stood up and started pacing, the same nervous energy I remembered from when he was a teenager who'd gotten caught sneaking out. I was trying to help. I was trying to plan ahead to make sure you were taken care of. By taking care of yourself first. That's not... He stopped mid-sentence, and for a moment, I saw something crack in his facade. Okay, maybe you're right. Maybe I was thinking about the money. But Dad, you have to understand the pressure I'm under. What pressure? Financial pressure, the kids' college tuition, the mortgage on our house, Sarah's medical bills from last year. We're drowning, Dad. And I know this house is worth a fortune just sitting here while you... While I what? Live in it? David slumped back into his chair, and suddenly he looked like the little boy who used to cry when he scraped his knee. I'm sorry, I know how that sounds. I know I messed up. But what did you tell the lawyer? Please tell me there's still time to fix this. I pulled out one of the chairs and sat down across from him, the same position we'd been in 12 hours earlier, but everything had changed. There's time to fix it, David, but not the way you think. What do you mean? I opened my briefcase and pulled out a copy of the trust documents Morrison had prepared. David's eyes widened as he saw the legal letterhead. This is a copy of my new estate plan. Your inheritance is no longer guaranteed. David grabbed the papers and started reading, his face cycling through confusion, disbelief, and growing alarm. What is this? Conditions? Requirements? Dad, you can't be serious. I'm completely serious. If you want to inherit anything from me, you're going to have to prove you deserve it. David flipped through the pages, his voice getting higher with each condition he read. Live within 1 mile of my residence for a minimum of 2 years, provide weekly assistance with household maintenance and yard work, attend family dinners every Sunday. Dad, this is insane. Is it? These are the things a loving son would do anyway. The only difference is now there's a legal requirement. But what if I can't do all this? What if my job requires me to travel, or we need to move, or... Then you don't get the inheritance. It's that simple. David set the papers down with shaking hands. Where does the money go if I don't meet these conditions? Various charities, organizations that help elderly people age in their own homes with dignity, groups that support families who actually take care of each other. The silence stretched between us like a chasm. David stared at the legal documents like they were written in a foreign language. This isn't fair, Dad. You can't just change the rules in the middle of the game. Can I? You changed the rules this morning when you decided I was too inconvenient to live in my own house. That's different. How? David opened his mouth to answer, then closed it again. For the first time in years, he had no response. Let me explain something to you, son. When you came here this morning, you thought you were talking to a helpless old man who would do whatever you told him to do. You thought you could manipulate me with fake concern and empty promises about my safety. Dad, I really was concerned about your safety. Were you? Then why didn't you offer to install grab bars in my shower? Why didn't you suggest we hire a cleaning service or a lawn care company? Why didn't you ask what modifications might help me stay here safely? David's silence was answer enough. You went straight to the nuclear option because it was the most profitable one for you. You wanted me out of this house so you could cash in, and you dressed it up as concern for my well-being. Maybe that's partly true, David admitted quietly. But Dad, you have to understand. I never meant for you to feel what? Betrayed? Used? Like my own son saw me as nothing more than a bank account with legs? David's eyes filled with tears, and for a moment I saw the boy I'd raised, the one who used to crawl into my lap when he was scared. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I know I handled this all wrong. But please, isn't there some way we can work this out? Some way to fix what I broke? I looked at my son, really looked at him, and saw something I hadn't seen in years. Genuine remorse. Not regret about getting caught, but actual sorrow for the pain he'd caused. There is a way to fix it, David. It's all spelled out in those documents. You really expect me to move within a mile of here? To give up my career and my life to take care of you? I expect you to decide what's more important to you, my money or my company. David picked up the papers again, reading more carefully this time. Some of these conditions, they're not just about taking care of you. You want me to volunteer at the senior center, to take classes on elder care, to write you a letter every month explaining what I've learned about family? That's right. Dad, it's like you're trying to completely change who I am. I smiled for the first time since our morning conversation. No, David, I'm trying to help you remember who you used to be. The kitchen fell quiet, except for the ticking of the old clock on the wall, the same clock that had counted down the minutes of David's childhood, his teenage years, his transformation from the son I'd loved into the stranger who'd tried to sell my house out from under me. What if I try to meet these conditions and I fail? What if I'm just not capable of being the son you want me to be? Then at least we'll both know where we stand. David folded the papers carefully and slipped them into his jacket pocket. I need time to think about this, to talk to Sarah, to figure out if this is even possible. Take all the time you need. But David, understand this. The clock starts ticking the moment you make your decision. And once you start, there's no going back. What do you mean? I mean, if you choose to try to meet these conditions and then give up halfway through, you lose everything. No second chances, no partial credit. You either prove you're the son I raised, or you prove you're the stranger who walked into my kitchen this morning. David stood up slowly, like a man carrying the weight of the world. And if I decide not to even try, if I decide these conditions are too much, then you've made your choice, and we both live with the consequences. You'd really give away millions of dollars to charity rather than leave it to your only son? In a heartbeat. David walked toward the door, then stopped and turned back. Dad, can I ask you something? Of course. When you packed those 2 suitcases this morning, where were you really planning to go? I smiled, thinking about the conversation I'd had with my sister Helen 3 months ago, when I'd first started suspecting where David's frequent visits were leading. I was going to Helen's house in Colorado. She's been asking me to visit for years, and she has a guest room that's bigger than most apartments. I could have lived there quite comfortably while my lawyers sorted out what to do with my ungrateful son. You had it all planned out. David, I didn't survive 68 years by being unprepared for disappointment. He nodded slowly, like a man who was finally beginning to understand the depth of his miscalculation. I'll call you in a few days with my decision. I'll be waiting. After he left, I sat alone in my kitchen, surrounded by the ghosts of better times. The house felt different now, charged with possibility. Either my son would rise to meet the challenge I'd set for him, or he'd reveal once and for all that the boy I'd raised was gone forever. But either way, I'd won something important today. I'd won back my dignity, my agency, my right to live in my own house on my own terms. And sometimes, that's the most valuable inheritance of all. 3 days passed in strange tranquility. I found myself moving through my house with new purpose, touching familiar objects like I was seeing them for the first time. The coffee mug David had given me years ago sat in the cabinet, and I left it there. Instead, I used the plain white one Margaret had preferred, the one that felt solid and honest in my hands. My phone rang exactly 4 times during those 3 days. Twice from David's number, once from a number I didn't recognize that was probably Sarah, and once from David's work phone. I let them all go to voicemail, but didn't bother listening to the messages. Whatever David had to say, he could say it to my face when he was ready to make his decision. On Thursday morning, I was watering Margaret's rose bushes when Mrs. Patterson from next door appeared at the fence line. Eleanor Patterson had been our neighbor for 18 years, and she had the kind of radar for family drama that could detect trouble from 3 counties away. Robert, dear, is everything all right? I saw David's car here for hours on Tuesday, and he looked quite upset when he left. I set down the watering can and walked over to the fence. Eleanor was 73, sharp as a tack, and had never been one to dance around difficult subjects. Family discussion, Eleanor. Nothing that concerns the neighbors. Oh, pish. Everything concerns the neighbors when it involves shouting. And there was definitely shouting. I almost smiled. Eleanor had probably heard every word of our kitchen confrontation through her open windows. David thinks I should move to a senior living facility. Eleanor's expression shifted from curiosity to indignation so quickly, I thought she might vault the fence. He thinks what? Robert Williams, you maintain this property better than men half your age. Your grass is greener than a golf course, and you've got the only house on the block that doesn't need painting. Nevertheless, David believes I'd be safer somewhere with professional supervision. Professional supervision. Eleanor spat the words like they tasted bitter. You know what that's code for, don't you? I have my suspicions. It's code for, I want to sell Dad's house and spend his money. My nephew tried the same thing with me 3 years ago. Claimed I was too old to live alone, too frail to manage my affairs. You know what I told him? What's that? I told him I'd live to be 100 just to spite him, and I'd leave every penny to the cat shelter. Eleanor's fierce loyalty made something warm spread through my chest. This was what family should feel like. Not the cold calculation I'd seen in David's eyes, but genuine care mixed with righteous anger on my behalf. What did you tell David? I told him I'd think about it. Eleanor studied my face with the shrewd attention of someone who'd raised 5 children and buried 2 husbands. But you're not thinking about it at all, are you? No, Eleanor, I'm not. Good. Because if you let that boy railroad you into some sterile facility while he profits from your house, I'll march over there and give him a piece of my mind that'll leave permanent scars. I laughed. The first genuine laugh I'd had in days. I appreciate the support, but I think I've got the situation handled. Do you? Because in my experience, adult children who start circling like vultures don't give up easily. They just get more creative with their manipulations. Eleanor was right, of course. David wouldn't simply accept defeat and walk away. He'd regroup, strategize, maybe even recruit Sarah and the grandchildren to his cause. The thought of my grandkids being used as emotional weapons made my jaw clench. Eleanor, can I ask you something? Shoot! When your nephew tried to push you into assisted living, how did you know for certain what his real motivations were? Eleanor's face hardened with remembered anger. Because he brought a real estate agent to my birthday party. Claimed she was just a friend, but I caught them in my kitchen discussing square footage and market comparisons. That's when I knew it wasn't about my safety, it was about his commission. A real estate agent. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. David's sudden expertise about property values, his confidence about what my house was worth in today's market. He hadn't just been thinking about selling my house, he'd been planning it. Robert, you look like you've seen a ghost. In a way, I think I have. That afternoon, I did something I hadn't done in months. I called my old friend Pete Hendricks, a retired real estate agent who'd helped Margaret and me buy this house 37 years ago. Pete was 74, still sharp, and had maintained connections throughout the local real estate community even after his retirement. Bob Williams, you old coot. How the hell are you? I've been better, Pete. Listen, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be straight with me. When have I ever been anything else? Has anyone been asking questions about my property, making inquiries about value, marketability, that sort of thing? Pete was quiet for a long moment, which told me everything I needed to know. Bob, what's going on? Are you thinking about selling? Just answer the question, Pete. Another pause, longer this time. Your son called me about 6 weeks ago. Said you were considering downsizing. Wanted a preliminary assessment of what the house might bring in today's market. 6 weeks ago. Before David had started his campaign about my safety, before his concerned visits became more frequent, before this week's ultimatum. He'd been planning this for over a month. What did you tell him? I told him the truth. Prime location, excellent condition, probably worth between $280 and $320, depending on how quickly you wanted to move it. But Bob, I also told him that any serious discussion would need to involve you directly. And what did he say to that? He said he was just gathering preliminary information, that you weren't ready to make any decisions yet. Said he didn't want to pressure you, but wanted to be prepared when the time came. When the time came, not if, when. Pete, did David ask you about anything else? Market trends, buyer demographics, anything like that? He asked about senior housing communities, wanted to know if there were any new developments targeting affluent retirees. I gave him a few names, figured he was just being thorough. Thorough. That was one way to put it. Another way would be calculating, manipulative, and coldly efficient. Bob, is everything okay? You sound like something's wrong. Everything's fine, Pete. Thanks for the information. Bob, wait. If you are thinking about selling, you know I'd be happy to help, but only if it's really what you want, not because someone's pushing you into it. I appreciate that, Pete. I really do. After I hung up, I sat in my living room staring at the wall where Margaret's favorite painting hung. It was a landscape she'd bought at a local art fair 20 years ago. Nothing fancy or expensive, just a peaceful scene of mountains and meadows that made her smile. David had always thought it was tacky, too sentimental for his sophisticated tastes. Now I understood why he'd been so confident during our kitchen confrontation. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision born from genuine concern about my well-being. This was a carefully orchestrated campaign that had been months in the making. David had done his research, identified his targets, and prepared his arguments with the precision of a military operation. The only thing he hadn't counted on was his target fighting back. Friday evening brought the call I'd been expecting. David's voice on the other end of the line carried a different quality than it had during our kitchen confrontation. Less arrogant, more uncertain. Dad, I've been thinking about everything we discussed, about the conditions you've set up. And I want to try to meet them. Not because of the money, but because I realize I've been a terrible son and I want to fix that. The words sounded rehearsed, like he'd practiced them in front of a mirror. But there was something underneath the careful phrasing, something that might have been genuine regret. David, before you make this commitment, I need to ask you something. What? When did you first call Pete Hendricks about getting my house appraised? The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long, I thought the call had dropped. Dad, I can explain that. I'm sure you can. The question is whether your explanation will be the truth or another carefully crafted manipulation. It's not what you think. Then what is it? I was trying to be prepared. I knew that eventually you might need to move somewhere with more support, and I wanted to understand all the options. 6 weeks ago, David, you called him 6 weeks ago, before you'd said a single word to me about senior living facilities or safety concerns. Dad, please let me explain. Go ahead. I was worried about you. You seemed more forgetful, more isolated. I thought if I understood the financial aspects, I could present you with a complete plan when the time came. A complete plan that happened to involve selling my house and using the proceeds to pay for my institutionalization. It wasn't like that. Then what was it like? Paint me a picture, David. Help me understand how secretly appraising my property behind my back was an act of filial love. I was trying to protect you from having to make difficult decisions under pressure. If something happened, if you had a fall or a medical emergency, I wanted to be ready to help you transition smoothly. The explanation was smooth, reasonable, exactly what you'd expect from someone who'd had days to craft the perfect response, but it didn't explain the real estate agent at Eleanor's nephew's birthday party, and it didn't explain the cold calculation I'd seen in David's eyes during our kitchen confrontation. David, do you remember what I taught you about trust when you were growing up? That it's earned through consistent actions over time. That's right. And what happens when someone breaks that trust? They have to rebuild it from scratch. Exactly. So here's what's going to happen. You say you want to meet the conditions I've set up in my new estate plan. Fine. But we're going to modify those conditions slightly. Modify them how? I walked to my desk and pulled out a legal pad, the same kind I'd used when I was running my construction business. Sometimes the most important decisions required the simplest tools. First condition remains the same. You'll move within 1 mile of my house within 60 days. Second condition also remains the same. You'll provide weekly assistance with household maintenance and yard work. Okay, but I'm adding a third condition that wasn't in the original documents. For the next 2 years, you'll be responsible for researching and presenting me with 3 alternative living arrangements every 6 months. I don't understand. I want you to find ways for me to age safely in my own home. Modifications, services, technologies, whatever it takes. You'll research them, price them out, and present them to me in writing. If any of your recommendations prove useful, I'll implement them. Dad, that sounds like you're actually open to making changes. I've always been open to making reasonable changes, David. What I wasn't open to was being manipulated and lied to. And if I do all this, if I meet all the conditions, then I inherit everything as originally planned? No. No. If you meet all the conditions, you'll inherit half of everything. The other half will be held in trust for your children's education and future needs. Dad, that's not what the lawyer's documents said. The lawyer's documents can be modified. In fact, I'm meeting with Mr. Morrison again on Monday to make these changes official. David was quiet for so long, I started to wonder if he'd hung up. David, are you still there? I'm here. I'm just trying to process all of this. Take your time, but understand that this is my final offer. You can accept these modified conditions and prove that you're capable of being the son I raised, or you can walk away and forfeit any claim to my estate. And if I choose to walk away, then you'll have made your priorities clear, and we'll both live with the consequences. Can I have the weekend to discuss this with Sarah? You can have all the time you need. But David, I want you to understand something. This isn't about punishing you. This is about giving you the opportunity to remember what family really means. I know, Dad, and I'm grateful for the chance. Are you? Because gratitude isn't something you express with words. It's something you demonstrate with actions. I understand. Do you? Because for the past 6 weeks, while you were secretly appraising my house and planning my exile, I was watching my son disappear and trying to figure out where I'd gone wrong as a father. Dad, you didn't go wrong. I did. And if you'll let me, I want to make it right. Then prove it. I hung up the phone and walked to the kitchen, where I made myself a cup of tea using Margaret's favorite mug. The house felt different now, charged with possibility and danger in equal measure. Either David would rise to meet this challenge and redeem himself, or he'd reveal once and for all that the boy I'd raised was gone forever. But either way, I'd given him a fair chance to prove who he really was underneath all the manipulation and calculation. And sometimes, that's all a father can do. The weekend passed quietly. No phone calls, no unexpected visits, no signs that David was wrestling with the decision that would define our relationship for whatever time I had left. I spent Saturday working in Margaret's garden, pulling weeds and trimming roses with the methodical precision of a man who had all the time in the world. Sunday brought church, where Pastor Williams delivered a sermon about forgiveness that felt like it was aimed directly at my situation. Forgiveness, he said from his weathered pulpit, doesn't mean pretending that wrong wasn't done. It means choosing to give someone the opportunity to do better. I thought about those words as I drove home, wondering if what I'd offered David was forgiveness or just another form of testing. Maybe they were the same thing.